I should ask first of all whether everyone can understand what apparently is my incomprehensible POM accent, as a poster to Twitter said. Okay, most of you, okay, that's good. The same night I saw that post on Twitter, I had some Facebook responses from friends in the UK saying, why are you putting on an Australian accent in your interviews? So, well, there you go. I'm kind of tempted to add to my biography. We strongly suspect that our dog might now be developing dementia. I mean, so no, apparently it is a condition which can affect dogs, although, yeah. Anyway, that should get quite interesting, whether we can apply the same kind of support skills to canines. There you go. So I've kind of got a plan, kind of. I mean, Jason said that I'm looking forward to what you're going to say later, and I thought, well, so am I, because, you know, I'm not always entirely sure what I'm going to do. I'll probably talk a little bit about our experience in the UK. I probably will go off at all sorts of tangents, and I do feel for Jason and his team, because I basically ranted at them on the variety of subjects from dementia to the Brisbane riots of 1942 all afternoon. So, but to some extent, I'm kind of led by you. And I would like to extend an invitation now to anyone in the audience that has dementia. If you want to interrupt me or ask questions or make comments, you must feel free to do so. Because we know from other people with dementia, being told to hold that thought is a little bit difficult when you have dementia, so please feel free. As for the rest of you, you can wait till the end. But while we're on the subject of the rest of you, right, I would, those of you without dementia, I would like you to imagine for me, I want you to form a very strong picture in your mind's eye of a dementia care facility that you know about. Maybe it's one in your area. Maybe it's one that you've used. Maybe it's one that you've read about or visited. I'd like you to imagine, if you were sitting in there, what sort of things you'd be seeing as you were there. What would you be hearing? What sort of sounds are going on around you? What sort of things are you smelling? What does it actually feel like as you're sitting in that dementia care facility? I'd like you now to imagine that tomorrow you go and see your GP, because you've been having a few just really, really mild problems with say, your memory or doing the kind of things that you do, just that little bit more difficult. And your GP says to you, look, I'm sorry to tell you that you've got the very early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. How many of you are now going to make a beeline for that dementia care facility that you have on the other side of your mind? Thank God for that. Okay. I've been using the same introduction to presentations about dementia-friendly communities for about 4 or 5 years now. And I live in dread of the day when someone goes, yeah, I would. Because that kind of ruins my whole presentation, really. You know, but no one ever has. The point being, when I first started to work in the dementia field in about 1994, everyone that we encountered with dementia was people pretty much in their late, middle to late stage dementia. So our helpline, for example, was a helpline for carers. We didn't take a call from someone with dementia until about 1999. I was a person that took that call, and I was shocked. The person said to me, I'm calling because I've just been diagnosed with dementia. And what I actually said was, oh, do you mean your partner? He said, no, me. And it just shows you really how far we've come in the intervening period. And now with the huge improvements in diagnosis, people are getting their diagnosis earlier and earlier and earlier. In the UK, we're not supposed to say early. The language got shifted suddenly into the word timely. I think there are political reasons for that. I prefer the word early myself, and I think my personal view is the earlier, the better. And what people with dementia tell us over and over and over again is, we don't want to go into a care facility. We want to carry on doing the same stuff we've always been doing. And you know, if you think about your life, you know, think about the things that you do, the way that you live your life. The things that you have to do, like banking and shopping and all that sort of stuff, but also the things that make your heart sing, your hobbies, your interests. Those are all the things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about how we can make our communities better places for people with dementia. Now, I'm going to kind of ruin my point a little bit, but I want to introduce a slight caveat before I go on. I've got some concerns about the use of the word the term dementia-friendly. And I'll explain why. Is anyone familiar with the concept of Lady Bountiful, or is it a peculiarly British thing? Well, this is all right. This is Lady Bountiful, and what Lady Bountiful does is, she's a typical dowager duchess, because the UK is exactly like Downton Abbey all the time, except it rains more. But those of us, workers, we get a little visit now and then from Lady Bountiful. I changed especially for you. I've left my little peak cap and my little dotty shirt back in the hotel. She comes down from the manor every so often and helps us to cross the road. And we are so grateful to her. Now there's something about the word dementia-friendly that for me that employs the language of beneficence, the language of largesse, as if people with dementia should somehow be grateful that we're not treating them badly, that we're not excluding them from our communities, that we're not discriminating against them, that we're not referring to them, although the problem is we still are, as the living dead. I'll come on to that in a little bit. That's a phrase we hear a lot in the UK. Dementia, the living death, which of course makes people with dementia the living dead. So somehow people with dementia are sort of grateful. Now, when I started thinking about this, I thought about the really strong connections between where people with dementia are now and where people with physical and sensory, and to some extent learning disabilities, were in the 1970s and 80s. Go back to 1970s in the UK, and if you saw someone using a wheelchair go past, everyone would go, "Oh, did you see that?" I mean, these days, if someone using a wheelchair goes past, no one bats an eyelid. No one bats an eyelid, and that's mainly because of people with disabilities themselves deciding that the status quo wasn't quite good enough, thank you very much, and we were going to do something about it. One of the first things that people with disabilities did was they thought, what's this kind of, how are we perceived? How do we kind of fit within society? And this is largely where many of you are probably familiar with, the medical model of disability that basically says, the problem with you, mate, is that your legs don't work. So we have the medical model right now of dementia that basically says the problem is these people's brains don't work properly, and that's the problem. Of course, there is another way of looking at it. Well, there's nothing we can do really about the fact that someone might be experiencing brain damage because of dementia, but there's everything we can do about all that other stuff that overlays that and actually disables many people much more significantly. Now, that might sound counterintuitive, but in my father, for example, my father was much more disabled by other health conditions that he had than his 3 forms of dementia: Alzheimer's, multi-infarct dementia, and Korsakoff syndrome. So this is when disability activists and academics created the social model of disability that says, all right, I know my legs don't work, but there's this other stuff as well. There's the inaccessible environments. There's attitudes, there's prejudice, and there's organisations that discriminate against me. So let's just briefly look at disability experience. Okay, you had environments. So I remember, when I was growing up, one of my neighbours had cerebral palsy, and he wasn't intellectually impaired, but he did go to a special school, and he was picked up in a special bus with a rainbow on the side of it, and taken to a special school that had what was described as a watered-down version of the national curricula, because he couldn't get into mainstream school because there were steps up to it. He couldn't get on the buses because there were steps up to the buses. Now, of course, we now have legislation in the UK that if you're a service provider, you're a council, you have to provide access for disabled people. They're citizens with equal rights. So people are no longer segregated to quite the same extent, but certainly people with physical disabilities. They can get on the bus, they can go to the library, they can go to school. Similarly, attitudes, prejudice was very strong against disabled people. In fact, one of the other things that disabled people did was they looked at how they were represented in the media. Because the media have got a big role to play in what we think of people, right? And the three predominant images of disabled people in the 70s and 80s, and still to some extent this is true, you had three choices of role model if you were disabled. You could be the pathetic victim, and in the UK we used to have a fundraising thing from the Spastic Society, as it was called, which was a little girl with a leg brace on, looking up beseechingly with a hole in her head that you put the money through. It was, yeah. So you could be a pathetic victim, or you could be a pantomime villain, usually a British one, and your disability was usually a mark of your inner evil and your villainness. So think about all the Doctor Who villains from the 60s and 70s. Each one of those had a disability. A hooky hand, a missing eye, a speech defect, some physical stigmata, some representation of their inner evil. So pathetic victim, pantomime villain, or, and forgive my language, but this was the language employed by disabled radicals at the time, you could be a super crip. The guy that goes up Everest on his stumps. These were the three versions that were available to you. And disabled people said, look, this is not on. We're real people. We're as varied and we're as extraordinary and as ordinary as everyone else. So we can equally apply this to dementia, can't we? All right, someone might have dementia, but you can probably think, and I'll be showing you a few slides from our work, of how the environment disables people with dementia, right? You can probably think about how the environment disables you as a person without dementia. Anyone ever been to the UK and used the London Underground? Great, then you take my point. Well, if I were to, in fact, let's do this now. Let's have a demonstration. Right, I'll just take this off. So I was saying about the various aspects of now, you're not hearing impaired, right? But you are hearing impaired right now by the environment that you're in. Nothing to do with your impairment and everything to do with the environment, that I've put you in. And it's the same for people with dementia. Similarly, people experience prejudice and stigma. I mentioned the living dead thing, and I saw the look on some of your faces. It's quite shocking. But it's mainstream stuff until fairly recently in the UK. In 2007, the Sunday Observer, one of our more socially aware broadsheet newspapers, marked the beginning of Alzheimer's Awareness Week with a double-page spread. A big banner across the top ran, "Dementia, the living death, facing 700,000 Britons." 2 days later, a large dementia organisation that I was working for at the time launched its own Awareness Week with a quote from its tame Z-list celebrity, Russell Grant. Russell Grant is a cuddly astrologer and all-round. Anyway, his statement, and this was used on every bit of publicity, on every newspaper article about dementia, used his statement. He said, and this is word for word, and you can look it up if you don't believe me, "Dementia is more than a violent, vicious condition. It robs the person of their soul like no other." What are we talking about here? The living death, no soul. What are we talking about? Great. And people wonder why older people with cognitive impairment are the group most likely to experience mistreatment and abuse. You'd have said teenagers. Okay. Yep. I've got about 5 years to go on that one because I'm a late dad, but yeah. And see, this is another thing about the environment. You see, you've completely thrown my thread now. It's great because it gives us another illustration of how the environment disables people with dementia. The kind of things that might throw your eye off our concentration, and people with dementia are the same, but more so. And the more stressful the situation is, the more kind of like multi-input the situation is, the more likely people are to lose their thread. So what was I talking about again? I was talking about, zombies. So maybe this explains why people with dementia are probably the highest risk group for mistreatment and abuse. Because when we dehumanize people, it becomes easier to abuse them. Now, I don't want to make too much of these parallels, but in every campaign of mistreatment and genocide, if we look back through history, it starts by dehumanizing the victim. Goebbels did it very effectively in Germany. Again, I don't want to make too much of that, but you get the point. The images and the messages that we get about dementia from our mainstream culture affect both how we feel about people with dementia and, crucially, how we feel about ourselves when we get dementia. And finally, we have organisations that discriminate against people with disabilities. Now, my father, he had 3 forms of dementia, greedy bugger, but he was pretty fit guy because he swam every day. Now, his local pool, our local pool, had a lovely ramp up to it, so if he was a wheelchair user, he could get in, no problem. It had a lovely hearing induction loop, so if he was hearing impaired, he could hear the announcements, though obviously not while he was in the pool. If he was visually impaired, there was information provided in Braille everywhere. One day, the council changed the opening hours of the pool, and they sent in this leaflet about it that I think was probably done by, I don't know, someone who'd been to design school or something. It looked great, it looked funky. Couldn't read it though. You know, you had print over images, you had small print, it wasn't using plain English, there were logos of corporate sponsors everywhere. It was an absolute nightmare, so he couldn't understand it, right? He took it along to reception and said, look, I've got this, just have this leaflet about, and I don't understand it. And they were busy. Did you know what they said? I said, it's all there on the leaflet, mate, go and read it. So he left humiliated, patronised. He never swam again after that day. And from that day on, I can tell you the day when because his dementia was doing this. It was maybe a little step down with a vascular dementia, no. And on that day, it went woof. He died, 2 years afterwards. He went into an immediate spiral. He became very isolated from his mates. He stopped going out altogether, actually, sat watching the telly, basically, and drank himself to death, and actually ended up dying with diabetes, unsurprisingly, because he put on a lot of weight. Because although while he was very fit, he had a huge appetite and he liked a beer, as soon as he stopped, dumph. Now, if I couldn't get into that pool because I couldn't get up the ramp with my wheelchair, I would have a really, really good case morally and actually legally to say, you have unfairly discriminated against me. My belief and assertion is that my father was unfairly discriminated against because the council did not provide information in a form that was easy for people to read. Not just easy for people with dementia to read, by the way, easy for everyone else. And that's a really important point about dementia-friendly communities. Actually, what we should be calling them is not dementia-friendly. We should just be calling them friendly communities. Because if we make life easier for people with dementia, we make life easier for everyone. More of that later. What am I going to talk about now? Oh, yes. What are dementia-friendly communities? I'm not going to dwell on this because you've been doing this in Australia for quite a while. This is what people with dementia tell us, and it's not exactly rocket science. They're good places to live, places where you can find your way around, where you can feel safe, where you can use the facilities, where your mates don't clear off as soon as you get dementia, and where people can give you a little bit of support and understanding if you need it. Tell you what, though, I know plenty of people who've been diagnosed with very early stage dementia who do not need support because they're living in an environment which is supportive. That might be counterintuitive, right? I don't need support in terms of, I'll just take we're fine. People don't need that in the very early stages of dementia. As dementia progresses, and if dementia progresses, in the case of vascular dementia, people will increasingly need more support, but increasingly we're seeing people diagnosed earlier and earlier. And what's going to keep people connected is changes in understanding and changes in the community. We'll see more about that a little bit later. Right, a bit of the context stuff. I'm not going to go through it point by point because that's just really dull, isn't it? But basically, we got a few more people than you have, but our proportions of people with dementia are roughly the same, as are the proportions of people living in the community. And that's going to increase, though, that proportion of people living in the community. Because our model of residential care is collapsing fairly quickly for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, the funding model isn't really holding together. It's expensive. People don't like it. And generally speaking, if you want somewhere really good, it's really expensive. I mean, although having said that, I've encountered places which are cheap as chips and really great because they've got really great leaders and they've employed really good people, but on the whole, it's a lot of money. I know a couple with dementia who actually moved into a Premier Inn. Because seriously, their home was inaccessible. He also has physical disabilities. They moved into a Premier Inn because it's cheaper. When they need one-to-one sort of close support, they buy it in. Premier Inn's got a pool. You try and find a residential care home in the UK that's got a swimming pool. And actually, the staff are actually, in this particular place, they know a lot about dementia because this guy never stops telling them about it. Okay, I'm going to come on to the Prime Minister's Challenge in a moment. I want to give you just a few of the other drivers. And of course, we're living longer. There's more people with dementia. You've all seen the figures. It's not going away. It's going to increase and increase and increase. Even if we find a cure for Alzheimer's, there's still the 399 other causes of dementia that we've got to find a cure for. So it's not going away anywhere anytime soon. The second big thing is that baby boomers, of which my generation are the kind of tail end, grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, living and breathing the language of civil rights. We know our rights. We've got a stronger sense of entitlement, for better or worse. And basically, I'm not going to put up with the same kind of treatment that my father put up with, or my grandfather, or my grandmother. And my guess is that most of my generation will not either. In fact, when I get back to the UK, we've managed to finally convene a meeting of all sorts of the great and the good from politics and media to talk about how we can turn dementia into a disability issue, to support people with dementia to start thinking differently about their condition and how that interacts with society and their citizenship, and because after all, people with dementia should be thinking, actually, I've got a right to be included, I've got a right not to be discriminated against. We've also got some austerity. Yeah, quite a lot of austerity actually. Well, some of us have, and that's been a big driver. It didn't help that we were kind of launching ideas around dementia-friendly communities at the same time that the coalition government were launching a brand new shiny initiative called Big Society. And what Big Society basically said, and I think there are elements of it which are absolutely right, is that we need a more community-wide response to people's needs. Communities should be more community-y, to coin a technical phrase. Of course, the irony is that it's the same party that in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher famously said there is no such thing as society, only individual families. So they kind of changed their mind about that, really. But hey-ho, there you go. The architect of the Big Society was a guy called Steve Hilton. My name is Steve Milton. And Steve Hilton looked almost exactly like me. Everyone hated and derided Big Society. So every time I got up to speak about the dementia-friendly communities, but I heard people going, "That bloody Steve Hilton, bastard." Yeah, I mean, luckily he's off. I think he might have moved to Australia, I'm afraid to say now. But Big Society is now dead and gone. It's politicians suddenly out of the blue stopped mentioning it. Look down the back of his sofa, might have fallen down there. But dementia-friendly communities are very much alive, and I'm so pleased they are, because if I get dementia, which I stand a reasonable chance statistically of doing, with my family background, I've had a fairly serious head injury, blah, blah, blah. So statistically, I've got a reasonable chance of getting dementia. I want to stay in my community. I want to carry on doing what I'm doing. I want to carry on driving for as long as it's safe for me to do so. I want to carry on going diving. People do dive in the UK, amazing though it may seem. The water is about 7 degrees and we've got a visibility of about 3 inches, but it's all we've got. So I want to make sure that my diving club knows that a diagnosis of dementia doesn't automatically mean that I can't go diving, or I need someone to kind of like control my BC or any of that sort of thing. Okay, and finally, businesses are starting to wake up to the idea that, tell you what, have you noticed that not all people with dementia and carers are skint? It's funny that, isn't it? And basically, if I can't spend my money in your shop, because I can't find any damn things, you keep moving it all around, or because every time I fumble for my change, I've got someone behind the till rolling their eyes at the customer behind me. If that happens, guess what? I'm going next door. There is a really, really good business case for businesses to become dementia friendly. It's quite an irresistible one. Apart from the fact, you have probably already got, if you're a business person, you've probably already got people with dementia using your service. And it might be that if let's say you run a shop, if your staff don't have that little bit of extra awareness to know how to support someone who's struggling a little bit, guess what? It takes more time. Better trained staff support people better, and they support people quicker. Here's the other business case. Any people involved in politics? No, I shouldn't ask you to put your hands up, should I? In the UK, that would be asking you if you, I don't know, kicked your dog recently or something. Yeah, politics in the UK, there you go. Don't worry about the fine detail, but basically, the Alzheimer Society commissioned economists, and they worked out that if we prevented 5% of people with dementia from going into care homes too early, by 12 months, then we could save £55 million. One of your colleagues, Jason, from Alzheimer's Australia, excitedly tweeted later that evening, Steve Milton says if we can prevent people going into care, we can save £55. And I had to say, oh, bloody hell, I know we've got austerity, but it's not that bad. It's 55 million. And then I thought to myself, you know what? Why are we just thinking about 5%? Shouldn't we be trying to stop all people with dementia from going into a care facility before they need to and want to? And I tell you what, if we can manage that, if you add those figures up, you're looking at about 2 billion Australian dollars. By making our communities more dementia-friendly and preventing people going into care, because that's how we'll do it, if communities are better places for people with dementia, they won't need to go into care so early. The evidence for that is absolutely overwhelming. And not just my little fluffy, ranty head evidence, proper peer-reviewed evidence. It shows us 2 billion Australian dollars. That's not an insignificant amount of money. I think you'll agree. Even though stuff is quite expensive now in Australia, I've noticed. What's that all about? $3 for a packet of chewing gum. Really? In Sydney? Sorry, I digress. I told you I babbled, didn't I? Oh yeah, we've got the Prime Minister Challenge on Dementia has been great. Prime Minister David Cameron, and I've got to give the guy credit, this has been a really great programme. He stood up in 2012 and he said, okay, we've got to do something. We've got to make massive improvements to research in terms of funding, done. We've got to make big improvements to health and social care. Oh yeah. But from my point of view, the biggest thing is we've got to start creating dementia-friendly communities. And the work had already started, but it gave us fantastic impetus from the top down. And I think that's a big difference between the UK and Australia. Ours has been very much top-down driven. Danger is, of course, is that there's going to be an election next year. Now Scotland aren't clearing off. There'll be an election. And because dementia-friendly, the Prime Minister Challenge is very strongly associated with our current government. If there's a change, all change. And because it's top-down, what we're trying to do as an organisation that works exclusively with people with dementia is make sure that people with dementia themselves are embedded right in there. And I think that's one of your strengths in Australia at the moment. The fact that you haven't had that top-down approach has meant that it's more grassrootsy. But crucially, you need to get people with dementia and carers in there, because if you don't, frankly, you'll fail. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail a bit later. How am I doing for time, by the way, Jason? I've been... Oh, have I? Oh, about half an hour. Right, you poor buggers. Okay, right. So these are the things that Prime Minister Challenge have introduced. We've got 63 places in the UK committed to becoming dementia-friendly. Note, does not say dementia-friendly. I'll be honest with you, in some cases, it's BS. It's at the point of rhetoric, again, because it's top-driven. Local bigwigs have taken it on. Lots of pictures of blokes like me in suits handing over oversized cheques to other blokes in suits. But actually, you speak to people with dementia and say, well, it hasn't changed my life, though, has it? But, I'm being unfair. The vast majority of cases, there's really good work going on. And it's improving, it's growing all the time. The Society have introduced a recognition process, and that's great. So what that means is that those communities that were in that race to become the first dementia-friendly town, village, restaurant, we've even got a dementia-friendly strip club now, would you believe? Oh yes, we have. But it was a bit of a race, you see, and actually in some cases actually became meaningless. We've heard reports of one particular local campaign where basically people go in to see a shopkeeper, they give them a leaflet and they walk away again, right, you're accredited. average amount of time, 2 minutes. That's not going to make a huge achievement. Now, you can understand why people do it. They're keen to get the message out there, but it's got to be meaningful. So if I've got dementia, I want to know that when I see that dementia-friendly symbol, that it's going to mean something. Just like if I see a wheelchair, a physical access symbol and I'm a wheelchair user, I need to know that those doors are 800 mil minimum. I need to know that there are other things that mean that I can get in. It's going to be the same for dementia. I'm going to expect a minimum standard of awareness and support wherever I go. And that's what the recognition process is about. Ditto, the British Standards Institute. I'm currently working with British Standards to introduce a code of practice for dementia and British standards. And I tell you what, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare in the UK because, unlike in Australia, where Alzheimer's Association is still very much the big beast, in terms of work around dementia. There's not a lot of much smaller and middle-sized organisations doing the same thing. In the UK there is. There's been a proliferation of organisations, including us, working in dementia. And everyone's been working in dementia-friendly communities. So we've all produced our own kind of think pieces and guidelines and worksheets and toolkits. Now we're trying to pull that whole lot together into a coherent narrative. And it's a really horrible process because someone's going to knock me off their Christmas card. Whatever I do, really. Again, differences, and I think that's why you've been able to produce some really, really high quality materials really, really quickly, because you're actually much more unified and dominant in your position. Anyway, so to my mind, the biggest thing and the most successful part of the campaign in the UK has been the Dementia Friends campaign. We have a target that by March of next year, 1 million people will have signed up to be Dementia Friends. Hi.
So do you think that process might have been quicker if organisations like Alzheimer's and the areas of disability had got together and developed those sorts of standards in a collaborative and more cooperative way? Like you mentioned, is happening now, and a lot of money has gone into the creation of a lot of separate standards with the rights of various non-profit organisations. So, is that something that would be a lot more proactive and would speed the process up?
It's going to be quicker for you. Did everyone hear that question? Okay. Well, but basically the question, and so I know I've got it right. Would things be speeded up by people working together much closely? Yeah, absolutely. I saw a great quote recently from, I think it was from Abraham Lincoln. It was someone had written it in a tube station, and it said, "The best way to get things done is not to worry too much about who gets the credit." And what a lovely world it would be if we lived in a world where that was true. Of course, it probably is true, but the problem is now we're all fighting for funding in the UK. It's a little bit more kind of like than it used to be in the charity sector. It used to be nice and cuddly and everyone got on. And these days, you're all kicking each other's heads in at the first chance we get, really. It's, yeah. But look, we've got what we've got, right? And the reality is that one of the first bits of work that was done in the UK, in fact, the first bit of work in the UK was done by us, Innovations in Dementia, even though we're a tiny little tiddly organisation. It had already been started, actually, in Australia. But in some ways, it's quite good that it's taken this long to get to the British standards point because we now know from experience. Because when we wrote our stuff back in 2010, it was at the level of theory. Because we didn't have a lot of experience of developing communities to be able to comment on. We now have had a lot of experience. So at least, even if it's a pain in the butt to pull together all these different narratives into one place, at least we're drawing on quite a broad thing. And of course, Alzheimer's Association Australia are going to be learning from our experience as well as from your own experience. So I know what you mean. I think if another big issue like this comes up, which it almost certainly will, my experience of the kind of internecine fighting and problems and the politics that we've had around this, I think absolutely right. If we can work together better, it would be much better for everyone.
So if you work to everyone with the concept that, along the lines of a dual disability, so you're not aiming for just one that
Well, that's a good question. Now, the reason why we're having to talk about dementia-friendly communities on top of age-friendly communities, on top of disability-friendly communities, is because the age-friendly agenda by and large, didn't take into account the needs of people with dementia. People with dementia aren't all older people with dementia, increasingly getting diagnosis before 65, and the evidence is very strong that the vast majority of people with dementia begin to experience change before 65. This is not a condition of older people. It increases the risk factor, but it's not a condition of older people. Now, and in terms of the disability movement, you know, I started off in the disability movement. I worked for a very traditional British organisation called the Royal Association for Disability and Rehabilitation. And we were kind of the orthodoxy. And it's around the time in the early 80s when you started to get snotty, gobby disabled people. And I had a lot of mates who were disabled who worked for a much more radical organisation who hated us. Because that's fun, right? It's really good. Because when you start off, you've got to have someone to boot, right? So these people were really, really radical, you know, and I'd always get told off for my language, for being disableist, and, you know, yada, 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 yada. Then, of course, I moved into the dementia field in 1994, and the same radical disabled people say, oh, dementia, it's a tragedy. I'll be thinking, hang on, where's your radical credentials now then? And the disability movement in the UK completely ignored the need first of people with intellectual impairment, people with learning disabilities, and people with dementia. And the reason we're here now is because people with dementia have been forgotten and left out. They've been left out by the disability movement. They've been left out by the ageing movement, by and large. But at the end of the day, you know, I think the positive message is we should be talking just about friendly communities. Because we make, you know, if we make our communities better places for people with dementia, they automatically become better places for everyone else at the same time. And I would suggest economically richer as well. The arguments, they really are no effective arguments for not having communities which are better places for people with dementia. Okay, where are we? Oh yes, dementia friends. 1 million. And look, this isn't about creating dementia experts, because actually, even though I've been sometimes introduced as an expert, I'm only an expert in my father's dementia and my grandfather's and grandmother's. As for the other 819,997, I haven't got the faintest idea. You'll have to ask them. The real experts in dementia are people with dementia and their carers. They're the real experts. At Dementia Friends level, we're trying just within little 45-minute awareness sessions at community level, just to raise that bar of understanding a little bit. The way it works is basically Alzheimer's Society has trained a couple of thousand dementia champions, and they then go out into their communities and spread the word by providing Dementia Friends sessions. Many of them work within organisations, so Marks and Spencer's, for example, and Tesco's, and a lot of other corporates, Boots, Lloyds Bank, have trained up lots of their people as dementia champions within the organisations, and they then go out and raise awareness among everyone else. They've recently introduced a video version as well. So if you want to become a dementia friend, you have to watch this video. It's about 20 minutes long. Make a declaration, and you then become a dementia friend. All right, it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, there will be people who don't get it, but the vast majority of people, because it's really not rocket science. It's mostly about breaking down those stereotypes. Look, all people with dementia are different. Look, all people with dementia are not staring off into space with gravy down their shirt. Because we don't need experts, we just need people who can lose those stereotypes about people with dementia and know how dementia can impact on people and what they can do to help. And that's it. End of story. It's very effective, and I'm really pleased to see that there are moves afoot to introduce a similar approach in many parts of Australia as well. Oh, and we've got 140 schools. Some of the school stuff's great, you know. Some of the stuff that I've seen that school kids have made about dementia for other school kids is absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Now, in terms of the kind of things that we've been looking at when we work on creating dementia-friendly communities, my work personally has been more organisational level. So I work with specific organisations to help them become dementia-friendly. But the model I use is one we developed when we were working with a large county, Hampshire, and a large unitary authority called Sheffield in the UK. And these are the things that we look at. Now these apply whether you're a small organisation, a large organisation, a chip shop, a multinational. Actually, you can apply the same kind of principles to family environments as well, in terms of looking at how connected someone is with a community and what you can do about that. And So the most obvious thing that people usually think of when they think about dementia-friendly communities, of course, is the place, by which we mean two things. We mean the physical environment, and we mean written and published information. One of the things that we do quite a lot, and I know that, Jason, you've been doing as well in Perth, is what we call walk the patch with someone with dementia. So that's actually going with someone with dementia into an environment and just seeing how easy it is for a person to get around. And you will be surprised, not least because if you're an organisation, you probably see your office every day and you don't notice stuff. Ditto with written information. And I tell you what, you've got a huge advantage in Australia. And again, right, I'm going to risk, this is the first of my crass cultural stereotypes, right? You tend to be more straightforward in your language. Am I wrong? Really? Okay, you tend to be more straightforward. There's a store in the UK, I think you might have it in Australia, called IKEA. Yeah. When IKEA first arrived in the UK, the instructions for their assembling their furniture, the joke was always that it started off in Swedish, and then it was translated into Japanese, and from Japanese into Turkish, from Turkish into Italian, from Italian into, Cornish, and then from Cornish into English. And because I come from the school of do-it-yourself that basically says, if at first you don't succeed, smash it to bits with a hammer. My garden was always littered with the remains of IKEA furniture that I'd put my boot through or kind of thrown out the window. Incomprehensible. And they listened to consumers and they thought through their instructions. And do you know what happened to their market share? Went through the ceiling. And it's now one of probably actually the biggest retailer of kind of in that market segment of household goods in the UK, rather than what it was before, which was a joke. We now have, people go to IKEA for the day. Now, I mean, seriously, and people go to eat the meatballs. Oh, what are you doing at the weekend? I'm going to IKEA. Yeah. Yeah, tell you what, that's another advantage you've got in Australia, in terms of dementia-friendly communities. If you want to go out, you don't have to go to IKEA because it's peeing down with rain all the time. And it's a serious point. You are a more outdoors culture. You can't have a dementia-friendly community if people are sitting at home indoors worrying about the gas bill all the time. It's an important thing. The fact that you're outdoors means that you're more likely to be in contact with each other. Okay, let me give you a few examples. Now, usually when I go and do an environmental audit, the first person I see is the building manager. What is it this time? What am I going to have to do now? We've already had bloody disabled people and all the rest of it. What is it? What are we going to have to do? How much is it going to cost? Yeah, how much is it going to cost? Now, obviously, if you're in the business, if you're working for a local authority, if you're in a planning department, or you're dealing with a new development, you've got massive scope to create from the scratch environments which are really good for people with dementia. And guess what? Really good for everyone else at the same time. And you can probably all think of environments that you've been in that you find puzzling. I stayed in the most luxury hotel I've stayed in on my travels was in, where was it? Oh yeah, Canberra. It was really, really, yeah, it was great, except I got lost. I could not find my room because there were mirrors everywhere. Not only were there mirrors along the walls, each door was mirrored. So it was like walking into one of those things at what's that place in Sydney, where all the mirrors, and everywhere looked the same. You couldn't find your way around. And then you finally find your room and you get in, and it's all really, really high tech. There's no, you don't know what's behind any of the cupboards because it's all smooth chrome, and there's all these anonymous buttons everywhere with these arcane symbols that probably anyone on the age of 19 might know. But yes, I'm walking around and I'm pressing stuff to see what happens, and you got blinds going up and down and televisions going on, and at one point I heard a voice say, "Yes." Guy, I tell you what, do you know what I mean? And you've been in that kind of situation, right? So if you're designing from scratch up, you can do loads to just, cut out that rubbish. I had another example recently, and this shows how exciting my life is now I've entered sort of definitely kind of middle age. And this is how we rock in England, right? The other day I got invited around to see my friend's new kitchen. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, highlight of my week that was. So there I was, making all the right ooh and ah noises as he was, clean lines. And I thought, oh, I tell you what, I could murder a cup of tea. And he said, oh, right, there's the kettle and there's the tea bag. So I made myself a cup of tea. Fished the tea bag out of the cup because I'm common, with a spoon. Got to put it in the bin. You know what I'm going to say, right? Where the hell's the bin? Now, I mean, on a serious note for a moment, we know that many people with dementia tell us that they stop cooking because they can't find stuff in cupboards, because the new designs are all kind of like you can't see stuff. And that's why in a lot of places for people with dementia, you'll see you've got cupboards with see-through, with glass fronts, or with a picture of what's in. It makes a huge difference. But if we thought about that from the point of design, not only people with dementia, but I wouldn't have dripped tea onto what at the time were my brand new brogues. I paid a lot of money for these, Try getting tea out of fresh tan leather, simply because I was in an unfriendly environment. Kitchen. Right, okay, but anyway, look, it doesn't need to be about big stuff, because some stuff you can make changes that make a massive difference, that don't need massive amounts of resources to change. This was the day that a new advice centre opened in the centre of Coventry that I was asked to go and give some advice on in terms of dementia friendliness. While I was there, I saw 3 people. I was there for about 4 hours. I saw 3 people approach the building, put their hands against the open sign, press, and of course nothing happened. It looks like a door, right? At first glance. Of course it isn't. It's a window. So they pressed on it. They looked like they felt stupid and they walked away again. Now, my guess is that, or my hope is that there are people who just felt like a bit of a... Do you use the word drongo? Okay. It's your word, I think, isn't it? We might say we feel like a bit of a div, or anyway, something like that. Because you've had that, right? You're pushing at a door that you meant to pull, and you feel stupid. Now, my guess is that there's a good chance that here was someone who might have recently got a diagnosis of dementia, plucked up the courage, because it does take courage post-diagnosis to get up, get yourself up and get yourself out, dealt with the public transport system, made their way through Coventry. Apologies to... Is anyone here from Coventry? Good. It's a pig hole. It's really, really... Is this going on the internet? Even people from Coventry, they kind of delight in what a pig hole it actually is. It's disgusting, it's horrible, it's complicated. And so anyway, they're going to know this. They finally get up to the place and the final straw, clonk. Now, in terms of resources, what do you think are the resource implications of making significant improvements to the dementia friendliness of this environment? You calculate how much time it takes a volunteer to pick the blobs of blue tack off a bit of paper, move it 3 feet to the right. But even actually before that, if they'd involved people with dementia in terms of checking out the accessibility before they'd opened, people with dementia might have been to tell them, look, we know that you think that means we are open, but we might take that to mean instruction rather than declaration. In any event, why not just do the right thing and put it on the door. Now, oh yeah, that was just the start of it, right? Because it was a former bank. You got inside, and because it was a former bank, because we have absolutely no natural light in the UK whatsoever, internal doors have to be made of glass. So of course you walk in, I mean you'll know, you walk in and again you're back in the hall of mirrors again. And you had overhead spotlights creating areas of light and shade. You had a blue carpet with bits on, which, is quite common for people, some people with dementia to what's that stuff? I'll be helpful and pick it up. You also had, the seating was also blue, so you couldn't see it. You couldn't see the seating didn't. Anyway, I could go on and on. It was a nightmare. So that was just the start of their problems. But I tell you what, it was all quite fixable, relatively inexpensively. The lighting could be dealt with relatively easily, but just by providing ancillary lighting to cut out the glare. We put posters at strategic places to cut down on the glare from the glass. It's all doable. Now, here on the next slide is from an audit that was done by a person with dementia that we work with at a facility in Sunderland. I like this place a lot. In fact, I like that. The thing is of that place, the people in there were great. And that's the biggest difference. But the Sunderland building was nice, but it's had a few problems. This is what he said. The sign on the door says automatic door. But you actually have to push the pad to the left of the door to open it. I assumed, you get the picture, right? How many times have you stood at a door that says automatic door? You see, I know I'm a bit of a pedant, right? But when I see automatic door, to me, that means it's automatic, all right? I don't have to do anything. Is that what that means? Not have to press and again, when you work in an environment, when you see this stuff all the time, you take it for granted. Getting someone with dementia in can really open your eyes. And again, he said, just put a sign on the door saying push the pad with an arrow, that pad there, to open the door would make it clearer. It's not rocket science, this stuff. It's not expensive, and it makes a huge difference. But not as much difference as the people. And I tell you what, and again, this is crass cultural stereotype number 3 about Australians. Generally speaking, you're much more friendly. Now, all right, you're probably thinking that you know someone who's not, and you've been in such a way they're not. But generally speaking, people in Australia are more friendly and open and warm than people in the UK. And that's especially true, in fairness to Jason, to the south. Especially true of the south. My wife's from Lancashire, and she always says, and she's right, the further north you go, the more chance there is of someone actually talking to you. But in the south, for all sorts of reasons, historic, migration patterns of people within the country and so on, especially London, where in London we would actually rather chew off our own feet than make eye contact with another human being. Well, all right, not literally, but I mean pretty close as damn it, especially on the tube. But I arrived in Sydney, probably is it the biggest city in Australia, Sydney? And I'm walking around, during the day, so it's not as if people are sort of like really jolly and have had a few kind of thing. It's during the day. And, every so often I'd make eye contact with someone, I get a nod, are you all right, kind of thing. That does not happen in most parts of the UK. It does not happen. You make eye contact with someone in some parts of the UK and you're looking for a fight, right? Or the assumption is that you've got a mental health problem. I don't know what you're laughing for, because those of you who've been to the UK will know that that's actually true. And in terms of dementia-friendly communities, it's a nightmare. And there is a certain irony, again, in trying to recreate dementia, trying to make people into dementia friends when we've been consistently told by generations of politicians that there's no such thing as community. To some extent, we're trying to recreate the way that the UK was, maybe 30, 40 years ago. But I tell you what, though, we're making quite a lot of improvements, and Dementia Friends is going to make a big difference. So for you guys in Australia, the biggest impact that you could possibly make in terms of making Australia a dementia-friendly country is to just build on what you're good at, build on your strengths, and that is your national characteristic as people who are generally open, warm, and friendly, because that's the thing that's going to make the biggest difference to people with dementia. Okay. I'll be very quick because I'm running out of time. We look at networks. Networks are crucially important. Now, if you're going to be involved in creating a dementia-friendly Western Australia or a dementia-friendly Perth, you need to get the right people involved. Now, who's that going to be? Again, just think about your life. Think about the people and organisations that make your life what it is. The things that you have to do, like banking and shopping. I'm assuming that everyone hates shopping, or is that's just right me? Okay, well, anyway, and the things that you love to do, albeit shopping, playing football, scuba diving, driving, anything. All of these organisations will need to make a contribution towards creating dementia-friendly communities. In the UK, these are the kind of organisations we look for. I'm not going to go through the whole list. The most important of these, I suggest, is the one at the bottom: people with dementia and carers. Because again, if you don't involve people with dementia and carers, it will be top down and it will fail. All right, at the end of 3 years, you'll have a few glossy leaflets from Alzheimer's Association. You'll have a few pictures of blokes like me in cheap suits, shaking hands with the blokes in cheap suits with cheesy grins, and that'll be about it. You've got to involve people with dementia and carers. You've got to start somewhere. If you haven't got a lot of people with dementia and carers involved already, you'll probably need to start with possibly atypical, highly articulate trailblazers. Start there, but as you start there, more and more people with dementia get involved. Okay, yada, yada, yada. Think about resources. Right, if you're an organisation that provides services or commissions services, or if you're a politician that pays for services or makes those kind of decisions, here are the kind of services that can support dementia-friendly communities. Early diagnosis, number one. One-to-one befriending support, crucial. Now that could be through volunteers, or more commonly it's actually just through the bloke down the road. And if we can create dementia friends, if we can get rid of stigma, it's more likely that your mates won't clear off. So you don't need a volunteer to take you fishing because your mates haven't cleared off because they haven't got a misconception about what dementia means. Post-diagnostic, peer group support is really important. Many people with dementia tell us that being in the company of other people with dementia is inspirational, especially if those people with dementia are living well. Because here's how it works in the UK. Oh, I'm sorry to tell you have dementia. Here's a really depressing leaflet. Now go away when there's a problem. Now, I wouldn't even get out of bed. I met a woman in Adelaide, 40 years old. She'd just been diagnosed. She was clearly still reeling from it. Nothing that I could say. I couldn't say, what kind of trite rubbish am I going to trot out in 30 seconds that's going to make a difference to her? What made a difference to her was meeting the woman who was standing to my right. Her name was Breda. She was 75 years old. She'd been diagnosed at the age of 40. And all right, she was struggling a little bit with her dementia after 35 years. But I'll tell you what, she was bursting with life. And I will treasure the look on that younger woman's face until the day I die. I saw someone transport from hopelessness to hope in the space of 5 seconds flat. Now, I didn't do that. Alzheimer's Association didn't do that. A person with dementia did that. Because this is a really important message, and I'm going to finish on this. I suggest to you that the idea that people with dementia are the living dead needs to be stamped on, jumped up and down on, shot in the head, buried in a brick and never brought out again. Because people with dementia can live well. Even people with very, very advanced dementia can live well if we look in the right place. The problem is, we keep looking in the wrong place for things like quality of life. We measure someone's ability to do a mini mental state exam. We measure someone's ability to navigate an environment. We measure someone's ability to count their change. What we don't measure, or we don't seem to take any account of because we're too busy bemoaning the loss of the ability to do the mini mental state exam, is the spark of humanity that is still there in people with very advanced dementia. And I want to give you 2 little case studies, and I will finish then, I promise. The first one, I was in a care home a couple of years ago, and it was quite a scruffy care home, and it's quite a good one. There's plants and animals everywhere. It was nice. It's very homely. And there was a very elderly lady sitting in the conservatory. A conservatory is a piece of glass that we put over our heads in the UK if we want to feel warm, even in the summer. Anyway, she had a big old cat on her lap and she was stroking. You could hear it purring outside. But then I saw this other old fella coming down the hallway on one of those, what do you call those 4-legged things? Strollers, right? And he looked in and he said, he said, "I want that." And I thought, oh, right, okay, here we go. And I thought I was going to have to go into some kind of distraction. I was planning how I was going to distract him. He went over to the woman. He reached down, and the cat jumped away. He fell down on his knees. He put his head on her lap, and she started to stroke his hair. Now, what that told me was that here is a woman who is in a good place, even though she's got advanced dementia. And what told me that is because there she was, extending care and affection to another human being. And you cannot do that if you are not emotionally well, emotionally in a good place. I wouldn't mind betting that her case notes said that she had very, very advanced dementia and her quality of life was very, very poor. I don't agree with that. Now, to finish my story, now I told this one yesterday, and I blubbed yesterday. All right, it's been a long tour. All right, I've been to a lot of cities. I'm getting a bit tired, and this one gets me a little bit every time. So apologies if I do, right? Now, as well as my day job, I'm a carer for a guy called Jack. About a year or so after I met Jack, he had no language, really. A few words maybe, very little in the way of spoken language. He was doubly incontinent. He needed support pretty much for everything. And he could be physically, he was quite disinhibited. You know, I was always getting punched in the face or poked in the eye. When I first met Jack, he was about 17 seconds old. And when I picked him up in the hospital ward and I looked at him, everything changed. And I looked him, he looked me straight in the eye, and I saw in that child the absolute spark of humanity. Jack's changed now, he's 5 years old. I've changed. I was speaking to Kate Swaffer. Some of you might know Kate has dementia. She said, I changed when I got dementia, but I changed when I got divorced for the first time. I changed when I got my degree. I'm always changing. She said, change is the only constant we have. And people with dementia change. We all change. I tell you what, though, I really hope that if in the future Jack gets dementia and he's 120 years old and someone else is holding him and looking into his eyes, that they see the same spark that I saw. And I'm going to finish there, because I just about stopped myself blubbing there. I think we've got a little bit of time for Q&As, haven't we, Jason? Yeah. It is. And I mean, you're only half wrong when you say it causes dementia. There's nothing we can do about the fact that someone is experiencing brain damage. But you think about all of the other ways which disable people, which make, and so basically anything that makes you confused or less cognitively effective will be massively amplified for people with dementia. That's why I keep saying maybe we shouldn't be talking about dementia-friendlies at all. We should be just talking about friendly communities that are better for all of us. But I tell you what, that's why it's great to think about people with dementia, because people with the experience of dementia does something. It's enabled to somehow put into really tight focus what it means to be a human being. And that's why, even though I've been working in the dementia field since 1994, I get more and more and more passionate about it. Yet partly through self-interest, because there's a reasonable chance that I'm going to get dementia, but also partly because I know that I can have a pretty good chance of living well if we can get this right, along with everyone else at the same time. So yeah, there is a lot you can do about it, and I would start by supporting the development of dementia-friendly communities and making as much noise as you can. One thing we are a lot better at than you in the UK. There aren't many things apart from cricket and rugby, and is complaining. And Jason, I'm sure, could give you a masterclass if he casts his mind back. We're really, really good at it. But if you work in the dementia field and you're not cross about the way that people with dementia are being treated, you need to get another job. No, I'm not. You think I'm joking? I'm not. If you're not made cross by the way that people with dementia experience life and the way they're treated, you really need to get another job. Yes. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of crossovers between the needs of people with visual impairment and needs of people with dementia. So things, for example, like, and in fact, you can download from our website. You can download guides to easy reading that we produce with people with dementia. So stuff like at least 14-point point, no serifs on text. The little feet you get on the end. The use of italics and capital letters. Some of the worst things, though, and you see it all the time, especially when you've got designers involved. Good grief. Is text over pictures. And the use of, but the biggest thing, the biggest change you can make, and again, crass cultural thing, number 3, plain English. Why is it that I'm English, most of you aren't, but you actually use English much better than English people do, in terms of plain English. In fact, do you remember that advert back in the UK, it does what it says on the tin? There's a product, there's a company called Ronseal, right? And they only make one thing, they make varnish. And you can imagine you're in the marketing department at Ronseal and you're thinking, how can we make this product sexy? Yes, it's really hard. I mean, it's just varnish. So in the end, what they did was they did a very Australian style advert. It might even have been an Australian actor originally. And all the advert is he holds up this tin. He's got a real kind of like movie face. He holds up the tin and says, Ron Seal Varnish. It does what it says on the tin. which in the UK has become a byword for straight talking plain English, and you do it well. It makes a huge difference. Huge difference. Please carry on using it. Well, I suspect, Jason, that to be honest, you're probably better qualified to perhaps a private conversation afterwards might be in order. Because I think there are quite a few issues. Yeah, I mean, Jason, you're a former. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But, I'll be honest, I wish that I could say that I'm shocked. I'm obviously really sorry for what's happened, but I'm not shocked. I mean, in my case, my father had 3 forms of dementia. He was very poorly treated. For the last few months of his life, he had to be in a care home. He was very poorly treated, especially by his GP and by medical professions. Not by the home. The home were really good, but medical professions. They messed up his advanced care planning. It was, and bear in mind that I spent a good part of my professional life supporting other carers to get the best deal for a person with dementia. And it often made me think, well, if it's like that for me, what's it like for people who are that much older, who don't know the ropes and aren't confident? So I'm really sorry that you're having that problem, but yeah. Well, in the last few days of my dad's life, my little boy, I'm quite a late dad, my little boy would have been, just over 1, just starting to toddle. And, even though the home was saying we really don't think it's safe, you can't really have people with advanced dementia and children, Jack didn't give a damn about my dad's dementia. And my dad sure as hell didn't give a damn about, Jack's relaxed approach to confidence management. And it's great, so, I love it when I see a home that's messy, because homes are messy, aren't they? You've got animals and plants and, yeah.